And to me, the CISOs of today have a different role than they probably did decades ago. It used to be a technical job. You just secure it, tell people what to do, and they did it. But today, with all the risks that are out there, all of the balancing you have to do of, well, do you slow down the business or do you protect the business? How do you meet the right medium? Quite frankly, I think CISOs today are far less technical and they're far more of a leader, a business person, a risk person. So I'd love to get your take on how can you be successful today as a CISO?
First, I love the premise of your question. I think CISOs are the sweet spot. That's where all the disciplines that are required to create digital infrastructure, make it resilient, use it for its intended purposes, defend it, that's where they all come to bear, which is more than the technology disciplines. The CISO oftentimes is the quarterback or the bandmaster, pick your metaphor, but they're the ones that are essentially kind of arraigning all of those diverse disciplines to pull off the miracle of how do we extend and defend the business using digital infrastructure. The second thing I would say is to your point about kind of leadership. What I've always loved about kind of leadership as opposed to management is that the role of leaders is to redefine what's believed to be possible and appropriate. And this is a moment when we need to rethink and redefine what's the role of a CISO. Right? Now, there are still some CISOs, very few, who think that their job is to build and defend digital infrastructure. But I think increasingly I've been impressed by CISOs that say, no. The job of CISO is to actually to extend the business, the aspirations of the business, using digital infrastructure. It's a fundamentally different play. And to the point where those CISOs can then help the board understand that's why we use digital infrastructure. That's the role of the CISO. It actually creates a join between the boards and the CISOs that's very beneficial, right? Where increasingly the CISO can say, I've written the business plan. This is how we extend that business plan using digital infrastructure. Makes the board's hearts sing. It creates this very beneficial kind of virtuous circle in terms of how then do we actually feed resource to it, if not authority to it, so that the CISO can lead as they're expected to do, reframing what's believed to be possible and appropriate. Managers can then take over to actually execute that well-formed plan. But we need to actually get CISOs to a different place in terms of the mind's eye of the leadership of the company.
Yeah, I look at it almost identically from the corporate side, at least from my perspective, and that's that as a CISO, I have to enable the business to do what they all want to do in a safe way. That's the only thing I typically add on the end of it. I try to make sure they can do it without things going wrong from a security perspective. When you think about it, most of the decisions made by CISOs are for the business. It's to make the business more profitable. It's to keep them in business. A CISO yet has to generate $1 of revenue that I've known in any company. That it's just not what they do. So what your goal is, and again, I know the public sector is a little different from the perspective that you're not there to generate money, but you're there to do a lot of other things to protect the country and all other things. We're here to make money, though, in the end.
But I think to your point, the CISO could say, but if you deploy digital infrastructure in this way, it will generate revenue for the company, or it will generate market share for the company. Then we can use digital infrastructure to advance the interest of the company. If we silo this, which too often I've seen that, where there are entities, people within a company that say, I'm in charge of actually advancing the business proposition, or I'm in charge of operations, and you're in the IT silo, you're responsible for defending digital infrastructure. What you'll find is that the former group is taking risks using digital infrastructure. The latter group is expected to discover and mitigate those risks. It's an impossible proposition. All right, that second group playing whack-a-mole can never keep up. Let's take me to task. I said that I think the private sector is properly on the front lines of cyber defense. So given your private sector experience as contrasted with most of mine's in the public sector, what would you offer as perhaps the lessons that you've learned in that experience? And maybe put kind of the Active Directory or Semperis in the middle of that in terms of why then that's so important.
I've actually spent the last probably 10 to 12 years thinking exactly about that because I've been trying to mentor CISOs that some come from a very technical background, some come from I'm in a silo and leave me alone, just let me do my thing. So to me, the biggest lessons that I've learned, I'll call it in recent decades at least anyway, is that number one, a security officer is an officer. They're not a technician. They spend their time figuring out how to help the business, enable the business to achieve what they need to do. We've talked about this, I know already, but that is a huge part of it, and it changes your behavior all of a sudden. You're not there to say yes or no. I mean, that's a lot of CISOs love that binary on-off. As I've told one CISO that I mentored heavily is, I have to teach you gray. Everything's not black and white. You have to risk-based things, which is, I think, the second point that I would make that up from a learning. When you go out to do security, you can't fix everything. You have to prioritize what can cause the greatest harm to your company. And to do that, you have to understand the company. What drives the revenue of the company? What are the goals of that company going forward? If you don't know that, how can you possibly help protect where they're going and what's going to be happening? And pick the priority of, I want to fix this versus this.
I love that. It's almost as if you'd say that the best CISOs in a digital world have an analog mind.
Exactly. No,
it's about context. It's about nuance.
It is that level of detail, and I think that is a massive. And then the third is CISOs, in my mind, are it's a political role to a degree. You spend a lot of your time having to sell what, at least in your mind and your team's mind, is the most important. Once you've determined that the highest risk is X, how do you sell that to the board, to the senior officers, even to the business leaders who are going to have to spend the money to actually implement whatever you want to do?
Correct.
And to me, that's where you have to be a much more well-rounded person.
And we have to ensure that in addition to giving them the tools, we give them that voice, because their advocacy is essential.
Yeah, and that's I agree with you very much on the voice part, because again, some boards get it, some senior execs get it, some don't. So how do you get to the place where you are? And to watch the companies, at least there's a handful of companies you can go out there and see that where they have that support, the security environment is better.
That's well true. So all boards are struggling to get it. Some do, some don't. And the CISO can be the essential component of helping them get the role of digital infrastructure.
Yeah.
If they lead, right?
That is a big key to it.
Well, they're getting a lot of assistance to get that knowledge. I think the recent SEC rule for public boards made it very clear that cyber can be a material issue. Now, that's always been true, but now we've shown a bright light on it and said, but it is absolutely true in this day and age. And so you can see a very significant uptick in boards, at least public boards, but by an extension, private boards saying, I think I have to get this. I'm looking for some help. To your earlier point, the CISOs can be a huge component of them understanding why digital infrastructure matters, not for its own sake, but rather for the benefit, the welfare of the company. And boards who've stood into this have found that it's parsable, right? You can actually get your hands into it. You can have human-based language discussions, or whatever the language of choice might be, but you can talk about it as human beings as opposed to technologists.
Which that's new thinking in a way, because historically thinking, IT is removed from the business, if you will, day to day, and then security is a subcomponent typically of that, which is even further removed. So keep them locked up in their cupboard, and you're actually a proponent of just the opposite of that.
I agree. So I used this anecdote before, but I think it's useful at this moment. Imagine you're in a boardroom and a CISO walks in and says, I need $5 million to do two-factor authentication to prevent cross-site scripting. Does anyone have any questions? I can guarantee there won't be a single question,
no,
except for the possibility of, does that door still work? Can I get out of here? If that same person walked in and actually started in a different place, started where the board is, started where the company is, which is, I've read the business plan. I know we want to do business in some dodgy places, maybe in cyberspace places, dodgy places, where it's important to know who you're dealing with, but people pretend to be what they're not. And in the lack of good identity solutions, they can actually succeed in that. It's important to know that they have the resources that they say they have. If you give me some money, I will guarantee that you're dealing with who you think you are, that they actually have resources behind them. For every dollar you give me, I'll give you $2 in revenue. Now that's a conversation that makes the board's heart sink. It's the same conversation.
You're enabling.
That's right. It's the same conversation, but it starts from a premise of, I think I understand what it is we do together as opposed to what it is I do in my silo.
It would be interesting to have a survey of CISOs of major companies and how many of them think that way versus the other way of, I need money or the sky's going to fall.
There's some really good ones out there, and the best of them are actually stepping into that role.
Absolutely.
Helping the board have a conversation kind of as essentially a group of equals, saying, we all have a vested interest in digital infrastructure, not just you, where I'm kind of absolved from that, but all of us have a role to play in this.